Hello and welcome to The Achievement Illusion, a podcast for professionals who know how to look successful on the outside, but still wrestle with doubt, anxiety, and the persistent feeling that they're not quite enough on the inside. I'm Paul Grantham, consultant clinical psychologist, and today we're going to explore something that affects an extraordinary number of high-achieving professionals, but is rarely talked about openly. Impostor syndrome. If you've ever thought to yourself, I must have gotten lucky. People have no idea how little I actually know. One day they're going to realize I'm a fraud. Then today's episode is for you. We're going to unpack the psychological patterns behind these thoughts and feelings, not just from a theoretical perspective, but through the lens of cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, and through real-world experiences of people just like you. Consultants, clinicians, managers, therapists, teachers, lawyers, business owners, people with strong CVs, even stronger expectations of themselves, and yet a fragile relationship with their own success. Today's episode is titled The Achievement Illusion, Rethinking Success and Self-Doubt. And it's called an illusion for a reason, because for many people, the external markers of success don't match their internal experience. Promotions, awards, degrees, glowing feedback, client wins, all of that might be true on paper, but inside it doesn't feel earned, it doesn't feel secure, and it definitely doesn't feel sustainable. That's the paradox we're here to explore, and more importantly, to challenge. Now, this podcast isn't about empty positivity or telling you to just believe in yourself. We're going deeper than that. We'll look at how core beliefs, shaped by upbringing, experience, and personality, lay the groundwork for chronic self-doubt. We'll explore how well-meaning strategies like perfectionism, overworking, or self-deprecation actually fuel imposter syndrome rather than keep it in check. And most importantly, we'll learn how CBT-based strategies can help interrupt the cycle, replace fear with clarity, and help you relate to success in a more grounded, authentic way. Because here's the truth. You don't need to be more confident or work even harder. You need to shift how you relate to your own success, effort, and worth. You might be thinking, that sounds good, but I felt this way for years. And I want to say right now, you're not broken. Imposter syndrome isn't a mental illness. It's a pattern of thinking and behaving, one that's learned and reinforced over time. And like any learned behavior, it can be unlearned. Throughout this episode, I'll also share examples from professionals I've worked with, people in senior roles who've struggled quietly with feeling undeserving of their own success. You'll hear how those patterns showed up in their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and how with CBT-based tools, they began to reclaim a more balanced view of themselves. Now, a quick word before we go further. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy. If you find any of the ideas here resonate deeply or stir something that feels overwhelming, I encourage you to reach out to a qualified mental health professional. But if you're ready to reflect, challenge old patterns, and step into a new way of understanding your worth, you're exactly where you need to be. Take a breath, settle in, and let's begin untangling the achievement illusion. At its core, imposter syndrome is the internalized belief that your achievements are not deserved, that you've somehow fooled others into thinking you're more competent than you truly are. It's the psychological experience of feeling like a fraud despite concrete evidence of your success. And it's usually accompanied by the fear that at any moment, someone will uncover the truth about you, that you're not as capable, not as smart, or not as qualified as they think. The term was first introduced in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. Their research focused on high-achieving women, many of whom, despite academic success and recognition, reported feeling like they had deceived others into overestimating their abilities. But let's be clear, this phenomenon affects all genders across industries and roles, from newly qualified professionals to seasoned executives, therapists to scientists, lawyers to leaders. It's pervasive and it's often silent. Studies suggest that up to 92% of people experience imposter feelings at some point in their lives. That number might surprise you, but here's what's important. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's harmless. Imposter syndrome doesn't just make you feel uncomfortable. It can restrict your career decisions, contribute to burnout, reduce job satisfaction, and take a toll on your mental health. And because it's often internalized and hidden, it thrives in silence and isolation. Let's talk symptoms. If you're wondering whether this is something that applies to you, ask yourself, do you find it hard to accept praise even when it's deserved? Do you tend to explain away your achievements as luck, timing, or a good team? Do you set impossibly high standards for yourself and then feel disappointed when you don't meet them perfectly? Do you feel driven to overwork to avoid being found out? Do you avoid new challenges because you're afraid of being exposed as incompetent? Do you constantly compare yourself to others and come up short? These are all hallmark signs of imposter syndrome, and many of them have a cognitive root, beliefs and assumptions that have been shaped over time. Let's look at some of those beliefs more closely. They often sound like this: I'll be found out. I only succeed because I work harder than everyone else. If I were truly competent, this wouldn't feel difficult. If I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. If people really knew me, they'd realize I'm not good enough. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, helps us identify and challenge these beliefs. It teaches us that it's not just our experiences, but our interpretation of those experiences that creates emotional distress. For example, two people might receive glowing performance reviews. One feels proud, validated, and motivated. The other feels anxious and thinks they've overestimated me. I won't be able to live up to this next time. Same event, different beliefs, different outcome. Now, here's an important nuance. Imposter syndrome doesn't show up in all areas of someone's life. You might be entirely confident in one domain, say running a household, mentoring a team, or delivering presentations, but feel like an imposter when it comes to networking, receiving recognition, or speaking among peers you admire. This selective doubt is often tied to where we feel most emotionally invested or socially judged. Professor Paul Grantham, in his work on integrated CBT for imposter syndrome, notes that IS tends to occur in roles or tasks where four things are present. 1, there's a lack of clearly defined standards. 2, there's a high degree of subjective judgment. 3, the task carries emotional or identity-based weight. 4, there's an audience or the perception of one. In other words, where there's ambiguity, visibility, and personal meaning, imposter feelings are most likely to arise. For example, a therapist might feel completely confident in their clinical skills, but feel like a fraud when they're asked to present research at a conference. Or a senior executive might feel fine leading meetings, but crumble when asked to share a personal story at a leadership retreat. This shows us that imposter syndrome isn't a universal experience, it's contextual. And that's a good thing. It means we can target the specific areas where these beliefs show up and work to change them. Before we move on, I want to highlight one more critical point. Imposter syndrome is not a sign of weakness or failure. In fact, it's often a side effect of ambition, conscientiousness, and high standards. These are strengths. But when those strengths are filtered through unhelpful core beliefs, like I must always prove myself or I don't belong here, they can become burdens. So, what if the problem isn't that you're not good enough, but that you've never learned how to internalize your success? That's what we're going to explore next. The disconnect between external achievement and internal validation. The heart of what we call the achievement illusion. Let's talk about the illusion itself, the achievement illusion. It's the false perception that external success and internal confidence always go hand in hand. That once you reach a certain level of accomplishment, you'll finally feel secure, proud, validated. But for many professionals, that moment never quite arrives. Instead, each achievement feels fragile, conditional, like a temporary reprieve from the fear of being exposed. You give a strong presentation, you get the promotion, the client renews the contract, you feel relief for a moment, but instead of building lasting confidence, the next challenge brings a new wave of self-doubt. Will I be able to do it again? What if this time they realize I don't actually know what I'm doing? That's the illusion. The belief that more success will eventually erase the doubt. But when the doubt is rooted in core beliefs, not objective reality, success alone can't fix it. Psychologist Pauline Clance described this dynamic as the imposter cycle. It's a repeating pattern that goes something like this. A new task or opportunity arises, something that puts your competence in the spotlight. Immediately, anxiety kicks in. You feel pressure to perform. Your mind fills with thoughts like, what if I can't deliver? This might be the time they find me out. I have to get this right. To manage the anxiety, you respond in one of two ways. Either you procrastinate or you overwork. Let's break those down. If you procrastinate, it's not because you're lazy, it's because starting the task brings up so much anxiety that you push it away. You avoid. You distract. And often you don't begin until the pressure of a deadline forces you to act. Alternatively, you might over-prepare. You work long hours, double and triple check every detail, trying to anticipate every possible flaw or criticism. You go far beyond what's expected, not because the task requires it, but because the consequences of getting it wrong feel catastrophic. In both cases, you eventually complete the task, and because you're capable, it usually goes well. But instead of feeling proud or reassured, you explain away the success. It only went well because I stayed up all night preparing. I got lucky this time. They were being nice. The task wasn't that hard. You experience relief, but not pride, and certainly not confidence, because in your mind, the outcome doesn't reflect your ability. It reflects your effort, your luck, or others' kindness. Nothing to internalize, nothing to build on, just a temporary escape from failure. And so the next time a challenge comes along, the cycle begins again. This is more than just a pattern, it's a self-reinforcing loop. And CBT has a name for the behaviors that keep it going: safety behaviors. Safety behaviors are the strategies we use to protect ourselves from imagined threat or failure. In imposter syndrome, these might include procrastination to avoid feeling inadequate, over-preparation to prevent mistakes at all costs, avoiding new challenges in case you're found out, micromanaging to stay in control and